Hello, and welcome to our Digging Deeper segment of White Guy on the Bus by Bruce Graham, directed by Jeffrey S. Miller, and assistant directed by Hannah Skirman, performed at Gordon College. My name is Michaela Parangalan, and I've interviewed our 5 cast members about their characters, the show's themes, and their experience in the creation of this production, in order to bring you, the audience, an opportunity to think critically about the show after having already seen it. I want to make it clear that this is not the perfect response or product, and it never will be, but to leave the show solely as a performance and not to engage through these interviews or the live talkbacks on October 23rd and 24th would be to ignore its gravity in our society and frankly be irresponsible. So I invite you into a posture of active listening, patience, and humility as you hear from our brilliant actors.
I think that so often we are presented these issues through the perspective of people of color, and I think that sometimes the people that need to hear these messages don't really listen to those perspectives or don't resonate with them, and so me being someone who is white, it is harder to put myself in the shoes of a person of color, just like Roz says, like it's the only perspective I've got, Molly. And so being able to view this situation and these problems through a character I am able to relate to, just from like a culture and like life standpoint, it's easier to see where I come in, like as Joe Hayes, where do I come in on these issues, and how can I affect the problems that are happening right now. I think that was a very interesting choice from the writer. I think it just really opens our eyes to see that even the really, really nice, really charismatic people that we would enjoy being around, like my grandfather or just like a professor, like even the people that we look up to and are comfortable with, that doesn't exclude them from this way of thinking that has been ingrained into society for such a long time. And so, because the reality is, it's not just the horrible, awful people that are racist. It's a lot of people that we look up to and are friends with that are racist as well. And so that the choice to have Ray be one of those people that you could get along with and could find yourself being friends with, and having lunch or coffee with is good, because we see that this affects everyone. Yeah. I think he definitely benefits from privilege. I think he understands and benefits from the privilege he has as a upper class white man. And then coming along with that is his racism. But for instance, his ability to just be so comfortable with doing the things that he's doing, what he does with his job and giving Shatique the assistant job without her doing work, like that, he could go to prison for that. And assault, he could go to prison for that. And like pulling a gun out on, like, there's so many things that he does without worry because he knows he's white. And Shatique also even says that a few times. It's like, I can't even call the cops on you. It's like, it's not they're going to come. They're not going to come. And so he's able to do these things without worrying about his repercussions because he is white. I think the scary part is that Ray doesn't really know what he's doing. Like I think he knows he's doing something that he wouldn't want to share with everyone, but I think from his perspective, he is helping Shatique, which is scary. because if we take a step back and just look at Shatique's life from before she met Ray to after she met Ray, and like take everything that happens out. Before she met Ray, she's struggling with student loans, living in a bad neighborhood, can't support her son very well, right? And then after she meets Ray, she has a job where she's making $50,000 a year, all of these benefits, and can move out of the neighborhood now, right? And so, like, from Ray's perspective, I think he's doing something that's good. Like, he thinks that. Now, obviously, we see how he does that and how he, is the worst to do that. But I think it's scary because he knows. I think he thinks that he's doing something good.
There are a lot of emotions that I felt. In the beginning, it was excitement. It still is excitement, but definitely excitement, gratitude, definitely some anger and sadness as well, though. I feel like gratitude because this is such, I feel like, a relevant role right now, and I feel like there are a lot of people that can connect to what my character specifically has to say and what she's going through. But it is sad because in this time right now, like this isn't just a role that I step into and step out of, which is like a lot of roles that I've played. Easily I can step into a role and step out of it. This role is a little bit different and probably one of the hardest roles, if not the hardest role I've ever had to play, because it hits deeper than any other role that I've played. Even though I'm not Shatique, things that she goes through, things that she feels, like I feel that on a personal level. So like, it definitely is not an easy role, but it is a very rewarding role. Honestly, like at first, I didn't think that it would affect me because I went to a predominantly white high school and then coming here, predominantly white. So I was like, nothing different. Definitely like I'm aware of my surroundings. I feel like hyper aware, but in this role, I've definitely felt a lot more pressure in the sense of like knowing that I am the only African American person in the room. I feel like I have to represent my whole race in this, and like knowing that I have to do that and like make sure that it's conveyed well and in a way that people can resonate with and that isn't super stereotypical and like, but still tells the truth of the character. It's a lot of pressure, and knowing that, and I know like obviously I'm friends with everybody in the room. There's no disconnect there, but like I do have that sense of aloneness, and like I've set a bar for myself that I feel like I have to meet in order to like get this message across and across well. So like, yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, there's definitely a sense of uncomfortability there. I think if we're looking at America in general, the people on top, the people who have a say in majority of things is the white man. So I think as much as I would love for it to be Shatique's perspective or just a black person's perspective in general, I think most people's perspective is the white perspective. So in that, I feel like people will connect to it more and be able to see what it is that they have at fault or what it is that they need to work on. There are areas of strength and weaknesses. Yeah, I think it's just a better way to connect. I think that it would have been great to see it in Shatique's perspective as well, but I think looking at the audience as a whole and who we're trying to target, I feel like it resonates more with the audience that way, I guess, yeah. I wouldn't say racist, but I would say she's very stereotypical. She's a very stereotypical black female living in a ghetto. Like, and I'm trying to, because obviously not every black female is like Shatique, and I'm different from Shatique. Many other people are different from Shatique, and I'm trying to add those perspectives of humanity to her, because she is written very stereotypically, and I wanted to not just leave it there. And I'm doing my best to like add different points of humanness to her that isn't just what you see on TV, the mad black woman, just stereotypical things about black females. Would I say that he wrote it in a racist way? I don't think so. But I think you do see those hints of stereotypical behavior, I guess.
So the context of the line, they're talking about Christopher's boss, and so he says, something like she got offended, or alarm bells started going off when they were talking about like sensitivity in images, and my husband asks, is she black? And he says, no, she's white. And that's when I say, even worse, with being, I think, politically correct is what it's talking about, and being sensitive. And I think that there is like a lot of truth to that. I think especially because of social media. That's the first thing I think of thinking about this. I think just look at social media. I think it's easy now, especially to say things and to assert your political correctness and to assert your care and your compassion and your wokeness, like you said. And it's super easy to do that and be genuine about it, and to be actually taking steps that are helpful and fighting, for racial justice. But it's also even easier to, assert that image and then not follow up on it at all. And I think it's especially easy when you're white to do that, because you can throw all that stuff out there with very little, emotional taxation, and then not do anything about it. But when you're black, it's different, I can only imagine, because you're putting that out there and it is your life. You don't get to, sign off from it, as opposed to, the whole white women are worse thing. You put that out there and then you can step away from it and not think about it again. There's definitely truth to that. I think Ray's defense definitely does. He's not just talking about it, he's throwing that back at Shatique when they're having an argument. I think 100%. It's like, look at my white wife who didn't have to go and do this, but who did it and ultimately died. I think you can see pretty clearly in the beginning that Roz doesn't desire any sort of special recognition for it. They're talking about the teacher of the year, and she's like, oh, I'm not going to win, I don't care. She shuts them down pretty much talking about it. I think she doesn't necessarily have the idea of, the whole white savior complex. I don't think she necessarily has that, but I think Ray uses it in a way, he kind of twists it around to be able to jab at Shatique, which I think, yeah, it definitely is. Thinking about Roz is really interesting. Playing this character is very interesting because I think that she's very complex. It's not like, I don't know, I think you look at the other characters, especially Molly, honestly, like you look at Molly's character and it's very like, wants to say everything in the politically correct way and be sensitive all the time in everything that she says, but then like, look, in the end, she ultimately gives in and she wants to go live in this nice neighborhood, and what she thought she wanted and what she thinks she stands for is like, is that actually what ends up happening? And I think Roz's character, she has no room for, or she has no desire to be sensitive, and she has no desire to be, politically correct or, saying the right thing that you should say. But, she's the one that actually goes into these schools and helps these kids that, are marginalized and everything. And there's honestly not much that I say in the show that talks about why I do what I do, which I think makes it a little bit hard. I don't know, she understands what she doesn't understand. There's this whole line where I say, it's a very different world that I'm dealing with. We can pretend that we understand it, but we're kidding ourselves, we don't understand it. And, and I think her shortcomings is in the sensitivity. I think we can get caught up in the sensitivity, and then all of a sudden we're talking about all of these, like, these smaller issues and ignoring the big issues that we really need to focus on. But I think that, you know, she's not sensitive at all, and she ends up turning people away from conversation because she's talking so aggressively and has no care for how the other person is feeling most of the time. And so I think it's this fine balance that she does not strike of actually caring, but then being sensitive and aware of the things that she's saying. I think her heart is in the right place, but her words can really turn people away. And I think that's what we can see in her, is like, you do need to be able to have conversation in order to actually be constructive.
So I think the main thing being tackled in that area, the main issue, the main bit of racism that Chris shows, is a challenge to, and it's more an aspect of white fragility, is the challenge to white objectivity, which is the idea and the belief where white people, white characters, white the white persona is a sort of neutral persona, an objective persona, if you will. We don't specify. The good example here, we don't specify white superheroes, but we do specify black superheroes. It's part of the whole idea of a white neutrality. And so when Chris is challenged that he may not be as objective as he thinks. Chris likes to tout that he has facts and polling results from reputable companies, which, by the way, he's the one who is compiling these facts. He can take out and include whichever facts he wants. So no matter what, any piece of any dissertation or any piece of research is going to be biased. In my mind, there's no such thing as objective research. Even a machine or a computer will be biased by the person who programmed it. But what that says about the challenge of Chris's white objectivity is he gets very mad. His reaction is to get drunk. His reaction is to rage against his the head of his department, and his reaction is to start leaning into more racist territory and generalizing people of color. And if Chris from Act 1 could hear himself talk in Act 2, he might think differently about himself. He might try to think of a different approach, but he doesn't. So that's about it. That's about what I have to say. Yeah, well, there's a reason that the data that he collects does exist, whether or not it is biased. I mean, it is biased in a sense, but the things do exist. You mentioned at Gordon. I mean, we have. If you look at the TGC reader, the Great Conversation course reader, has a very multicultural front. Which is good. It's good, quote unquote representation. If you look at our administration, you have, not as much representation. Our president is white. Whatever Dan Tymon's position is white. There's a lot of people who have power at the college. They're white. A lot of them are men too, but that's a different topic. But they are connected. But backing up a bit, whether or not there is veracity to his dissertation findings, still there is the issue that he's not objective in finding his research. As I said, no one really can be objective. What would be better, in my mind, for the dissertation, I don't know how sociology dissertations work. I'm not in grad school or a sociology major, but I think it would be good if, instead of one person compiling all this research, he consulted more than one person. He had a committee of people who are not like him, have different experiences than him, whether that be a different economic class, a different race, a different gender. I would say, from a textual point of view, there's a stage note that makes it clear from the beginning of the play that the play is from Ray's point of view. So no matter what we're seeing in the play, we're seeing it through the eyes of Ray, who is he's white. He also perpetrates violence and has racial, and uses racist power to his advantage. There's a lot of racist actions within the play. So given that, it seems that speech, if you step back, emphasizes the more racist elements, but it also emphasizes, from Ray's point of view, the hurt and pain that goes through somebody who has to deal with a mother figure being murdered. But from outside Ray's point of view, something he may not understand is that there has been centuries of the bent of whether through racist science or racist media reports or racist things that give the impression that black people, or any people of color, but black people in America in particular, and especially black men, are somehow more dangerous and therefore worthy of receiving extra violence, extra death penalty. That's what the whole issue with capital punishment, with mass incarceration, receiving these ridiculously long sentences for minor charges. That's the deal with police brutality, is when people, and this type of bias, this type of this element of racism, it affects white people in particular, but it affects everybody in America, because everyone's swimming in the same racial water. You can have a black policeman commit police brutality on a black male or black woman. That stuff happens like that. There's a particular story that comes to mind, but I'll go on. But no matter how you slice it, that exists, and I think the most helpful interpretation of that speech, of that monologue, towards better discourse and conversation regarding racism and how it affects America and American lives, the people. The most constructive way to look at it is that it is Chris's his dream is a product of centuries of racial conditioning to see black men as criminals, as Ray says in some points, animals and monsters, when really they are people. That's what Shatique brings up in the end of Act 2, where she brings up that Nazir couldn't read and that he was abused. It's not an excuse, it's an explanation, but it's an important explanation to have. It's a little problematic if you try to look at the ending as a tied-up conclusion. I feel like our production, and you can interpret it as tied up and closed, or you can see that stuff can happen after the play ends. If you see the characters as people, you realize that their lives did not begin at the beginning of the play, and they did not end at the end of the play. They still have to live with their consequences. Because the play is from Ray's point of view, we may think that he gets away and is fine, but we don't know what happens later. And because the play is from Ray's point of view, we see the end. I mean, Molly's speech is very scary and idealistic and so privileged, but also it seems just strange in a matter of just like, it seems so narrow, the point of view. So whether that's actually and this is going to sound like I'm talking about the characters as this is a piece of journalism. It's not, but whether or not that's what Molly actually said, or if that's what Ray perceived Molly as saying, we can only discuss that. And whether or not Christopher is actually happy and is happy about being a mini Ray, we don't know. It depends on how each production interprets that. I think ours leaves it open, which I think is more contributive to discussion rather than saying, no, this is how it ends, deal with it. It's better to keep it open, which I think we do.
when we started the process of rehearsal, we talked about how each of these characters say things that you've heard a family member say, or your best friend say, or even like Instagram stuff on Instagram. You've heard all of these pieces of these conversations before, and so I think that I've definitely some of the things Mikey has, Molly has said, I've heard on Instagram, especially when she talks about there's a line she has about how the line is African Americans can't hold the power can't be racist because they've never held the power, and I feel like I've heard a lot of that. But I also think that I think that these characters aren't necessarily meant to be a reflection of like people our age and necessarily the audience. I think that my interpretation, at least, has been that these are people that you have relationships with, and that you've heard these conversations or maybe been in these conversations before, and as the audience member, you're listening to these conversations, and then you're going to go start a dialogue with these people who you have these relationships with, and so it's more of it's not so much a reflection as it is like relatable characters, I think. Because I think that you listen to this and you take this information, and we don't want the Gordon College students growing up to be Ray, right? We want them to become people who are able to talk about these things and make wise and informed decisions. I know that for me, it can be really difficult to hear so many different sources of information from like different news outlets, and then my family versus what my friends are saying, and so I'm always getting all of these different perspectives on political topics and ethical and moral topics. And so I think that Molly also has that, because she works at a school in the neighborhood Bryn Mawr, which it's talked about in the show. It's like a very like nice, safe neighborhood, white neighborhood, and so she's getting that influence of people who have a perspective where they've grown up in these types of neighborhoods, and they teach at this school, and so that they have this own perspective. But then she also lives in the city, and so she goes out and she interacts with different people every single day who she doesn't necessarily like have any relationships with, but she maybe she gets into a conversation with the cashier at the grocery store that she always goes to, and they have a completely different perspective from someone at her school. And so I think that she's sort of formed these opinions, but she's not necessarily 100% certain on them, and she really wants Roz to like her. A lot of their conversations are them arguing, but they do have some really sweet moments in the show, and I think that Molly doesn't want to completely outright disagree with Roz, because she wants to have this relationship with her, and she wants to have this dialogue, but also she feels like, well, I disagree with what this woman is saying, so I can't just, agree to and put my own like beliefs and my own perspective aside. When I first read the show, the ending literally, I was like, wow, that's icky. That's not a fun ending. And it is very cyclical. Chris is being trained to be the next Ray. And yeah, it's very Twilight Zone or Black Mirror-esque, that ending. And to be totally honest, I really did, I was like, why does she have this huge perspective? Because I've never been pregnant, I don't have children, and so, I was like, what would make her have this big change in perspective? And I was talking about it with some people, and, I think that she has this big change because Roz, died, and how she died. And I think similarly to Ray, because it was pretty much her mother-in-law, she doesn't necessarily want to look beyond the fact that Nazir beat Roz. She doesn't really want to look at the fact that he did have a really rough childhood, and it's not like it was just some random person like off who had no reason to, like I think definitely Shatique starts talking about this in the show, how like, yeah, he had a really bad childhood and he was abused, and people who are abused tend to abuse people. And so, I don't think that Molly really wants to see that, because, and I think that kind of accounts for the huge change in perspective and turning point for her, that I think that the speech she has about the exterminator is, it's like, and Ray doesn't immediately jump to be like, hey, like, you should not do that, and so, yeah, but I don't know, I still struggle with it, like, looking at the script and thinking about my personal future, and ever thinking of, like, wanting, like, saying the things that she does, and, like, thinking that way. Maybe I'll have to be pregnant to understand what she's trying to say there, because it is really weird. But no, I think that because how Roz died and just how violent that was, she does that, it really scared her. And I think that there probably is a future for Molly to change her perspective again. I don't think that that's like a blocked off door, but I think she is a lot more wary, which, it makes sense, but it also doesn't mean that she has to completely disregard. She doesn't have to lump this one kid who did this one thing in with an entire community of people. We are an evangelical college that is willing and wanting to have these conversations. I think it's important that we have these like hard conversations, and we've had some of the conversations in rehearsal, and Jeff is really great about bringing up how this relates to the Bible, and he brings up stories in the Bible while we're working through the scenes, and so that we get that connection, so that it really grounds it in our faith and what we believe in. On a little bit of a lighter note, we definitely, one of the things we talked about in rehearsal was how many times the F word is used in this show. Oh. Yes, and it's a lot, and how that would impact like our audience, who can be made up of people who don't necessarily use that type of language, or who like actively avoid using that, and how that could really put an interesting conversation on if this like kind of conversation is allowed to happen, and I think it absolutely is. There's no set rules that God puts on exact conversations that we need to be having. I think that there are every single conversation we should be having, and there is something in the Bible that pertains to all of that.
First of all, looking at it just in the context of where we are as a nation right now, a lot of my questions were, why is this happening in the world right now? Why is no one trying to fight for justice? Like we just saw with Breonna Taylor, nothing happened to the officer. Like, where is the justice in this? And then looking at the play and seeing that this woman, she's on the bus, minding her own business, not doing anything to bother anyone, and this man comes into her life and wreaks havoc. And it's like, God, what are you trying to say to me in this? Like, where is the redemption in this? What are you trying to tell me? And I think that's just it, that this is a broken world, and that we cannot do this on our own. We can't, like, honestly, looking at Shatique and looking at my own life, like, there's no way that I could wake up every day with a smile on my face and go through the day without knowing that God is actually fighting my battles for me. Because there's no way. Like, knowing that there is officers out there hunting down people out there, white supremacists, people that are just racist, ignorant, whatever, knowing that, like, that, I would stay in bed all day. Like, there's no way that I would get out of bed. Like, it is honestly the grace of God that gets me out of bed and, like, puts a smile on my face and lets me do what I do and, like, be able to tell this story and show that, yes, the world is broken, that there are injustices, but this is, like, a story that you're able to point out and see, where is it that I'm at fault? Where is it that it connects with my life? And do I, like, look at your life and really see, if you're a white male and have been privileged your whole life, look at that and see, where is it that I can be of service? Where can I learn more? Where can I ask questions and see where I can be more of just looking at your life differently, I guess. Yeah, and for those in the Black community, I feel like it also is just like looking at, where is it that I can also be, because there are things that we have weaknesses to. I'm not going to blame white America for everything. Like, absolutely not. There are things that we can also work on, and you see that. And that's the cool thing about this show, that you don't just see, you know, bashing on the white male, and, like, you see the faults in Shatique as well. And I think that it just raises a lot of questions about your faith and seeing where it is that God is really working in your life.
It certainly had me think about how my faith interacts with how we look at racism from a theological standpoint. I can't think of anything particular in the show that does that. I think maybe just the topics in the show made me think about that more, as well as the current time we're in with coming out of the summer with the murder of George Floyd, and also the protests in Kenosha later on in the summer, and many other things going on, many other incidents and issues. But I definitely am thinking more and reflecting more on how theology and how we as Christians must respond. There's not really an option to that end.
You know, I think you can force meaning on stuff, but I struggle to really feel like I'm doing something overly important when I think about the kind of theater that I tend to prefer. I know there is importance, but, you know, is it enough is a question that I ask myself a lot. And I think with a show like this, we get closer to that, you know, we get closer to saying something that needs to be said without all the fluff in the way. And I think that the ways that I see God in this show is you see the importance of gentleness, but also firmness and, you know, demands for justice and demands for better, which I think says a lot about God's character. You know, you see the God of the Old Testament and the God who does demand justice and righteousness, but also is gentle and kind and understanding. And that's something that I think is really hard to picture, but we see that because you know, you see the way, it was like the last question I answered, you see the way that Roz talks, and she's incredibly aggressive and not really understanding and not gentle, and you see that that's not productive conversation. And I see the need for gentleness and the call for gentleness, you know, when I play that character. And then I also see that, you know, you see the frustration in Shatique's character, and you see the demand for justice, and I think this reveals a lot about God's character, the simultaneous gentleness and, you know, demand for better. It's the walk softly and carry a big stick kind of thing. I don't know. Yeah, that's what I think.
So before we started rehearsing, Jeff, our director, told us a story out of 1 Samuel or 2 Samuel. It's one of the two, one of the Samuels, where after David commits adultery with Bathsheba, the prophet Nathaniel, comes up to him and tells him the story where it opens David's eyes into who he actually is and what he actually did by committing this sin. And so I think it's very cool to be a part of telling that story. Like, so God used the story that was told to David to open David's eyes to sin and brokenness. And so now I get to be a part of a telling of a story that can also open other people's eyes to the sin and brokenness in the world.
we say at Gordon College Theater that we are athletes of empathy, and I think that this show is really calling us to be empathetic, and that, you know, God calls us to love, and he says, love me and love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that that is a huge takeaway from this time in our, for our generation. And I think that this show really promotes that with, conversations between Molly and Roz, even, how they do argue and they have disagreements, but that they try to love each other as much as possible. And, we have 2 marriages in the show, and that love. And then, Molly and Christopher, I don't think, ever really know what Ray did. And I think it can be especially hard with this show to feel any love for Ray by the end of it, or especially any forgiveness, because it really does end. Shatique is like, I hate white people. I'm never going to trust you guys again. It's very definitive. There's no room for forgiveness there, or love, really. And so I think that's a really big takeaway that I've had from the show, is it is really hard to give that love to everyone. But that, I think it's really important.
I wanted to spark conversation. I wanted to spark self-revelation. I think that, especially in the time, I've said this a million times, the times that we're in right now, it's so relevant. There are so many things that people are putting out there for us to contribute to and to march with, and all these different things. I think it's just, how can you contribute to our world today? What is it that you can do to help your community, help your brothers and sisters in the Black community, the white community, Asian community, any community? Specifically, this play talks about Black and white, but we're all humans. We're all different colors. We're all different shapes and sizes. So what can you do to be contributing to your community? I think, yeah. And there's also hints of the whole jail system and all of that. It just points to a lot of things that I think we can do more research on, because there are a lot of things that I myself was ignorant on. So I think that hopefully it'll spark just wanting to learn more and educate yourself more on just races and people and our systems in this country, which are kind of crazy. So
from a general point, the work is never done. We can rest in Christ, but until there is true reconciliation, we cannot stop working towards the civil rights movement. John Lewis uses the term beloved community. We cannot stop working towards a beloved community of believers and of people. And until that happens, we can never truly move past the racism that is ingrained in America, and that we've been swimming in for the past 400 years and more. And as to what God is, that's the main thing, is that the work is never done, and to examine myself, to think it's the speck and plank. I'm not accusing somebody. I must also look at how it is in my own life.
I think everybody who watches it is going to have a different, conviction. But I think overall, if you look at where do you see God in this show? What is the biblical message? I think listening is really, really important. I think we see the way that, Ray's character doesn't really listen to Shatique when she's saying, you just don't get it, you just don't get it, you just don't get it. And he doesn't sit down and say, okay, I genuinely want to hear it. You see the lack of listening. And, but also I think it's listen in another sense of you see the horrible and brutal, aggressive, physical racism in Ray's character, but then you see other subtle forms of it through the conversations that happen with all of the white cast members when they're sitting around like having a glass of wine. And I feel like we're all being called and asked to look at the conversations that we have with one another, look at the conversations that we've witnessed, our friends have and our family members have, and to listen to what we're actually saying, and think about whether it's right or wrong, because we can choose to not listen back to what we say, and think about what we say and know that it's, I don't know, and not have any idea that it's wrong. But if we listen to ourselves, I think we can look at the ways that we fall short and we actually need to do better, and we can listen to the conversations other people have and talk to them about, what are we missing here? And there was something else that I wanted to say about that. What did I say? I know. Oh, and to just, I think we're all in a place of, racism has been rampant for, more time than we can understand. But I think we're all coming to a place where a lot of people are deciding that it is time to listen. And what a great place to start. Obviously, it requires more than that on the whole. But if we can sit down and have audience members listen to this show, or as cast members read the script and take it in, and not go in with our own agenda of how we're going to read it and how we're going to see it, but sit down and listen to what actually is being said.
I think there are a lot of easy answers to this one, love your neighbor, don't be racist, don't hate people, right? Those are the easy answers, and I think those are too easy. I think the biggest one that I'm at least getting out of this is just to listen. Listen to what people have to say. Don't dismiss other people's stories, and don't go into conversations trying to win. Right? Go into conversations trying to understand. Because I think all too much we just go into conversations trying to win the conversation and change the other person's mind instead of trying to understand where they're coming from. And that's very harmful.
If you've made it this far, thank you. Our hope is that you've come away with even more to think about. If you're watching before October 23rd and 24th, we will also be having a live talkback session after the performances on those dates, where you can bring your thoughts and questions. Curiosity and faith fuel growth, so please come. We encourage you to start conversations with those around you and keep the dialogue going. Thank you.